Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to the Complex Cinema channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you enjoy the content. Today, we are going to be discussing the film Di Balik Hujan dan Dingin, Aku Tetap Menunggu. The narrative unfolds, painting a picture of deep yearning and the subtle textures of memory clinging to the edges of present life. We are introduced to individuals whose paths are irrevocably altered by a central, perhaps agonizing separation. Consider the character whose life seems tethered to the echoes of a past romance, a constant hum beneath the surface of everyday activity. Their professional life, perhaps in a field requiring meticulous attention to detail, such as architecture, or perhaps even the exacting world of a seasoned musician honing their craft, becomes a mere backdrop to this persistent internal monologue of waiting. The setting itself seems saturated with the mood, a persistent chill, a dampness that mirrors the emotional climate of the protagonist. This sense of waiting isn't passive. It's an active state, fueled by memories that refuse to fade. We see glimpses into the shared history, moments that illuminate why this absence is so profound. Perhaps one character was striving for a breakthrough in their artistic endeavors, their dedication mirroring the intensity of their commitment to the relationship, only to have that ambition complicated by the demands of distance or misunderstanding. The story navigates the delicate balance between hope and the erosion caused by time. There is a palpable sense that the world continues to turn, careers progress, seasons change. But for the central figures, time is measured by the gap between meetings, the unread messages, the silent anticipation. Think of the visual language employed, long shots emphasizing isolation, close-ups capturing the subtle flickers of doubt and resolve crossing a face. This mirrors the internal landscape of someone deeply invested in a relationship existing primarily in the realm of recollection. The film excels at portraying how mundane settings become imbued with personal significance. A particular cafe, a rain-swept street corner, these locales are not merely scenery. They are monuments to shared moments. The internal struggle often centers on reconciling the idealized memory of the other person with the reality of their current, perhaps distant, existence. If one character, say, channeled their emotional turmoil into compelling creative work, perhaps writing a novel or composing a symphony that captured the essence of this longing, it speaks volumes about transforming pain into something tangible, yet never quite resolving the core issue. Ultimately, the recounting of this story is less about a dramatic climax and more about the sustained resonance of emotional commitment against the backdrop of life's relentless forward motion. It is an exploration of enduring affection, the quiet dignity of waiting for something or someone to return, and the beautiful, melancholic realization that even in absence, connection persists, woven into the very fabric of one's ongoing existence. The atmosphere settles like the cold moisture in the air, leaving the viewer with the lingering impression of profound, unwavering dedication. The atmosphere remains thick with unspoken history, the kind that settles heavily in rooms where silence has become a companion. We observe the protagonist, perhaps an architect whose blueprints now seem incomplete, haunted by the phantom structure of the life they planned with the absent person. This dedication to structure and precision in their professional life contrasts sharply with the chaotic, beautiful mess of their emotional reality. One can sense the influence of their formative years, perhaps a disciplined upbringing or an early encounter with sublime art, and that instilled in them this capacity for sustained, almost stoic devotion. The object of this prolonged anticipation, often glimpsed only through fragmented memories or perhaps carefully curated photographs, is painted as equally complex. Maybe this person embarked on a career requiring intense travel or immersion, such as documentary filmmaking, where capturing the raw truth of external realities often meant sacrificing the stability of personal ones. Their inspiration, we might infer, often stemmed from themes of impermanence and the search for genuine connection in transient spaces, a philosophy that ironically set them adrift from the stability they sought to build. The narrative frequently utilizes the sensory details of their shared past, the faint scent of a specific cologne, the texture of a worn sweater, the particular way the light fell across a shared table, to reanimate those memories with vivid immediacy. These recollections are not static. They are living entities that fight against the slow, numbing effect of time. When the character faces professional challenges, the temptation is always to measure their success or failure against the implied approval or disappointment of the absent lover, making career milestones feel hollow or incomplete. What makes the waiting so poignant is the internal debate. Is this steadfastness a virtue, a testament to true love? Or is it a form of self-imposed paralysis? The protagonist wrestles with the ghost of potential conversations, the arguments they never had, the apologies never exchanged. This yearning is not purely romantic. It is existential, demanding a resolution to a narrative thread that has been left dangling for far too long. The rain, that persistent visual motif, isn't just weather. It's the soundtrack to their solitude, cleansing the physical world while deepening the emotional fog. The film reveals that enduring this emotional winter requires a unique brand of inner resilience, a quiet, stubborn belief that somewhere, amidst the cold and the distance, the possibility of reunion still exists, waiting patiently for the seasons, and perhaps fate, to finally align. The emotional landscape continues to be dominated by this almost unbearable suspension, a state of being caught between a vividly remembered past and an uncertain future. We delve deeper into the protagonist's daily rituals, which are subtly molded around the potential for contact. Imagine the character, perhaps a dedicated researcher or scholar, whose focus is usually on verifiable facts and established histories, now obsessively tracking subtle changes in weather patterns or looking up flight schedules, actions utterly divorced from their professional discipline, yet entirely dictated by their emotional core. This duality between the rational self and the yearning heart creates a constant, low-grade tension. The inspiration driving their past commitment is significant. Perhaps their initial attraction was rooted in a shared artistic vision or a mutual understanding of some obscure cultural reference, making the separation feel like a betrayal, not just of love, but of a fundamental worldview. When the protagonist encounters something beautiful or profoundly moving, a perfectly executed piece of classical music, or a particularly striking sunset over the city, the immediate, almost involuntary reaction is the desire to share it, a reflex immediately checked by the realization of the empty space beside them. This constant censoring of natural emotional expression drains a considerable amount of energy. The absent figure, when they finally appear in memory or through a fleeting communication, carries the weight of a life lived independently. Their actions are filtered through the protagonist's lens, often interpreted as evidence supporting the narrative of inevitable separation, even when they might be acts of unintentional neglect. If the absent one is depicted as a traveling photojournalist, their dedication to documenting suffering elsewhere might suggest an inability to fully commit to domestic happiness, framing their pursuit of external truth as the primary barrier. Their resilience, born from facing harsh realities in the field, ironically makes them less equipped to handle the quiet, sustained pressure of an intimate relationship maintained across vast distances. The film excels in detailing the small, almost pathetic concessions made to keep the connection alive in the mind. A specific brand of tea, a forgotten book left behind, these objects become talismans imbued with sacramental power. The protagonist might find themselves rereading old letters, not for new information, but to immerse themselves in the cadence and tone of the writer's voice, desperately trying to slow down the inevitable evolution of language and feeling that distance imposes. This waiting is an act of preservation, a fierce, almost painful attempt to freeze a moment in amber, fearing that if they allow time to fully progress, the memory will transform into something unrecognizable, or worse, something ordinary. The cold outside mirrors the necessary emotional insulation required to survive the duration of this vigil. The sustained emotional pressure warps perception, turning the mundane into a landscape fraught with symbolic meaning. Consider the protagonist now, perhaps a celebrated composer whose latest work is critically acclaimed, but feels hollow because the one person whose true artistic barometer mattered is absent. Their inspiration has clearly shifted from vibrant external observation to an intense, almost painful introspection, channeling the dissonance of hope and reality into complex, dissonant harmonies. This relentless pursuit of professional excellence, once a shared dream, now feels like a solitary penance, a way to justify the continued existence in the void left behind. The film masterfully uses the changing light to map the passage of internal time. Mornings are harsh, demanding the protagonist face the day's requirements. Evenings bring a dangerous softness, when the boundaries between what is real and what is longed for dissolve. This internal battle is exhausting. There are moments of near surrender, where the character contemplates tearing down the established shrine of memory, deciding that moving forward, even unhappily, is preferable to this exquisite, frozen agony. But some invisible tether, perhaps a shared, formative experience of overcoming significant adversity in their youth, pulls them back from the brink. They recall a specific time they navigated a crisis together, perhaps securing funding for a critical project or surviving a near disaster during an early overseas venture, reinforcing the belief that this present trial too can be endured. The absent figure is not static in these recollections. As time extends, the memories subtly shift, sometimes becoming sharper, more idealized, other times dulling around the edges as the effort to recall precise facial expressions becomes too taxing. If the absent lover was a humanitarian lawyer, driven by an almost zealous need to correct external injustices, their dedication to the global scale of suffering might have inadvertently minimized the significance of their personal commitment. This suggests a fundamental imbalance in their priorities, one that the waiting protagonist is now forced to confront. Was the love always destined to be secondary to their calling? The environment often reflects this internal division. Scenes might juxtapose the meticulously organized workspace, the stacks of perfect sheet music, or the perfectly aligned drafting tools, with the disarray of the protagonist's personal life. Unwashed dishes, neglected plants, physical signs that the maintenance of self has faltered under the weight of sustained yearning. The dialogue, when it occurs, is often elliptical, focused on surface pleasantries or professional updates, never daring to breach the core issue that keeps them apart. This restraint is perhaps the most heartbreaking detail. The shared language has been replaced by an etiquette of avoidance, acknowledging the vast space between them without naming it. The cold remains a constant, a physical manifestation of the emotional frost that has settled over the potential for spontaneous warmth. The endurance of this vigil necessitates the construction of intricate internal narratives, defenses, against the corrosive influence of silence. The protagonist doesn't merely wait, they actively curate their reality to accommodate the possibility of return. This is evident in how they maintain specific spaces within their dwelling. A particular chair remains uncovered. A favored book lies open as if momentarily set down. Small, deliberate acts of faith in immediacy. This careful staging can sometimes feel more real than their actual engagements with the present world. Their professional life, despite its outward success, perhaps the architect finally secures that landmark commission, or the composer receives an international award, serves only as a peculiar form of internal evidence. Each triumph becomes a silent offering, a proof of worthiness presented to an imagined jury of one. This drive for external validation is deeply connected to their initial bonding. They sought partners who understood the necessary sacrifices inherent in true dedication to a demanding craft. The irony now is that the sacrifice continues, but the recognition is unilateral. We see the toll this takes on their capacity for new connection. Casual acquaintances, or well-meaning colleagues attempting to draw them into shared activities, are met with a polite but firm distance. Their responses are measured, never fully committed, because any true emotional investment in a new relationship would feel like a definitive act of betrayal toward the one they are keeping alive in their heart. This self-imposed isolation is both a shield and a prison. They are trapped in a loop where the memory sustains them, but the maintenance of that memory actively prevents forward movement. The memory itself is becoming archetypal, distilled into essence rather than specific detail. Instead of recalling the exact words spoken on a certain Tuesday afternoon, the protagonist clings to the feeling of that afternoon, the specific quality of light, the sense of absolute mutual understanding, a moment of perfect synchronicity. These distilled emotions are more potent and less vulnerable to contradiction than factual recall. If the absent partner pursued a career in anthropology or historical preservation, their life's work involves rooting things in context. Yet, the protagonist finds their own context continually dissolving, sustained only by the emotional root they refuse to sever. The film suggests that perhaps this profound, unwavering waiting becomes, in itself, the protagonist's defining characteristic, overshadowing all their genuine achievements. The narrative drifts into a space where the protagonist begins to question the very nature of their waiting, moving beyond simple hope into a realm of philosophical acceptance, tinged with enduring sorrow. This shift is often subtle, triggered by an event so unremarkable, the sound of children laughing in a nearby park, the sudden clarity of a winter morning, that it momentarily shatters the carefully constructed edifice of their anticipation. They start to realize that the absence has become so integrated into their routine that its removal might precipitate a greater crisis than its continuation. Consider the composer again. Perhaps they have begun writing a piece explicitly about stasis, using minimalist structures that repeat and evolve almost imperceptibly, mirroring the slow grind of their personal time. Their inspiration is drawn from the endurance of geological features, the quiet tenacity of rock resisting erosion. This professional channeling of their emotional inertia suggests a subtle evolution. They are no longer just waiting for someone, but waiting as a state of being. The few interactions they might have with the absent figure, usually brief, text-based exchanges across time zones, are minutely scrutinized. Every punctuation mark, every delay in response, is parsed for hidden meaning, a desperate attempt to extract actionable information from noise. If the absent individual, the humanitarian lawyer perhaps, sends a message mentioning a severe setback or a moment of personal vulnerability while abroad, The protagonist experiences a surge of purpose. They can be the emotional anchor, the safe harbor. But this role is purely theoretical, an assignment they can never truly undertake. This dynamic reinforces the painful truth that their support is relegated to the realm of abstract goodwill. The emotional consequence of this sustained holding pattern is a deep fatigue that transcends physical exhaustion. It is the weariness of maintaining two realities simultaneously: the vibrant, fully realized shared life in the past, and the muted, functional existence in the present. Friends express concern, offering gentle suggestions about closure or alternative paths. But these suggestions are perceived as attacks on the protagonist's foundational structure. To close that chapter would be to admit that the years of steadfast devotion were spent guarding an empty monument. The cold, omnipresent in the film's texture, serves not just as a mood, but as a necessary condition, a sterile environment required to keep the delicate specimen of their shared history preserved, untouched by the messiness of new life and compromise. The story settles into the profound realization that sometimes the most powerful expression of love is not reunion, but the unwavering dedication to the memory itself, even when that dedication consumes the future. The film immerses us further into the protagonist's internal architecture, revealing how the absence has sculpted their very perception of time and success. The architect, now completing a stunning, perhaps slightly austere public building, finds that the true measure of its success lies not in critical acclaim or public function, but in whether the absent person would have approved of the precise curvature of the atrium or the choice of local stone. This professional dedication is revealed as a highly refined form of communication with the void, a demonstration of competence, a testament that they have remained capable while waiting. The echoes of inspiration from their formative years become clearer. Perhaps a shared obsession with the melancholy beauty of Scandinavian design, or a mutual reverence for poets who specialized in unrequited devotion. These shared aesthetic values are what make the current reality feel so discordant. The protagonist's artistic vision is now fundamentally tinged with a muted palette, mirroring the muted colors of a perpetually overcast sky, even when the actual weather permits sun. We see the subtle ways in which the past relationship has become mythologized. The flaws of the absent partner, which must have existed in reality, have been systematically edited out of the internal archive. What remains is an idealized construct, a perfect reason for the vigil. If the protagonist occasionally attempts to date, these excursions are characterized by a haunting spectral presence. They find themselves unconsciously measuring every new gesture, every shared laugh against the memory, always finding the new reality lacking in depth or authenticity. It feels like listening to a symphony played through a distorted speaker system. The notes are there, but the resonance is wrong. The film occasionally grants us a brief, almost painful glimpse into the reality of the absent person's life, often through second-hand reports or sparse, impersonal digital postcards. These glimpses reveal a life that, while busy and dedicated to its own external goals, the lawyer fighting on distant fronts, the filmmaker capturing ephemeral moments, also seems tinged with its own specific, perhaps less dramatic, loneliness. This perception is crucial. The protagonist is not waiting for a perfectly happy person to return, but for a complex, flawed individual whose path has diverged. Yet the protagonist cannot allow this complexity to truly penetrate, as it would jeopardize the purity of the waiting itself. The climax of this emotional state is not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, internal breakthrough regarding acceptance. It might manifest as the protagonist finally taking down one of the symbolic objects, perhaps carefully packing away the old letters instead of constantly rereading them, not as an act of surrender, but as an act of profound respect for the memory's ability to sustain itself without constant immediate tending. The waiting transforms from an active hope for immediate reunion into a recognition that this dedication has permanently rewired their soul. The cold remains, but now it feels less like a harsh environment to endure and more like the defining climate of their own chosen interior landscape, a space where enduring love takes the form of perpetual remembrance, played out against the indifferent march of the external world. The final movements of the narrative focus on the quiet alchemy that occurs when intense, prolonged waiting transitions into a form of existential integration. The protagonist's identity becomes inextricably bound to this state of anticipation. They are no longer merely waiting for something, but they are the waiting itself. This is most keenly felt in the realm of their craft. The composer, having exhausted the possibilities of dissonance in their previous work, begins to explore silence, the compositional space between notes, as the most significant element. Their music becomes less about filling the air and more about articulating the profound weight of what is absent, finding eloquence in negative space. This integration necessitates a shift in how the protagonist views their professional achievements. The landmark building is now understood not as a monument to their future with the absent person, but as a monument to their present fortitude. It stands as proof that even when the emotional core is compromised, the disciplined self can still produce beauty. This realization frees them from the transactional nature of their devotion, the silent offering to an imaginary judge, and allows for a flicker of self-recognition, untainted by expectation. The relationship with memory also undergoes a final, subtle transformation. The agonizing effort to recall every detail ceases. Instead, the shared essence, the core understanding that initially drew them together, is internalized and becomes a constant, reliable internal compass. The protagonist might finally allow themselves to notice the genuine warmth offered by a new acquaintance, not as a replacement, but as a separate, parallel reality that does not necessarily invalidate the past. They begin to understand that love, even when suspended, carves channels in the psyche that can, in time, accommodate new streams of experience without flooding the original foundation. When the film finally closes, there is often no dramatic reunion, nor is there a definitive, tearful severing. Instead, there is a moment of quiet solitude where the cold, damp atmosphere of the setting seems to lift, not because the external conditions have changed, but because the internal resistance has softened. The waiting has ceased to be a burden and has become simply the context of their being. The protagonist looks out onto the world, perhaps seeing the rain cease for the first time in the film without immediately linking it to the absent lover's return. They have learned to inhabit their own space fully, carrying the indelible mark of their profound, sustained love, not as an open wound but as a deep, defining scar. The dedication remains, unwavering in its truth, but its urgent, painful demand for immediate reciprocation has finally subsided, allowing life in all its quiet, ordinary complexity to tentatively resume. The concluding atmosphere is one of profound, almost monastic acceptance, a quiet understanding that the waiting has yielded a different kind of richness than the one originally sought. The protagonist, now fully inhabiting this self-defined climate of perpetual remembrance, finds a new utility in their specialized expertise. The architect, perhaps, begins designing spaces that prioritize introspection and quiet contemplation, structures built not for grand display, but for the solitary pursuit of internal equilibrium. Their inspiration is no longer drawn from external validation, but from the necessity of carving out functional sanctuary within personal emptiness. This integration of longing into one's professional identity is the ultimate testament to resilience. The composer's final major work is characterized by long, sustained chords that resolve into unexpected, minor keys, refusing the saccharine comfort of typical happy endings. This music speaks volumes about careers forged in isolation, the dedication required to pursue mastery when the primary emotional tether is severed means the work itself becomes the surviving partner, the tangible evidence of an unyielding spirit. The film suggests that the sheer act of continuing to create, to engage with the world through a rigorous discipline, is the true, silent act of defiance against despair. The memory of the absent figure also softens into something less accusatory. It evolves from a precise blueprint of what should have been into a philosophical touchstone, a benchmark for depth of feeling. The protagonist recognizes that the intensity of that initial connection, however tragically interrupted, provided a vocabulary for all future emotional experiences. They no longer search for a replacement. Rather, they search for experiences that are worthy of the capacity for depth that the past relationship unlocked within them. If there is any final interaction, it is likely a realization that the other person is equally shaped by the separation, caught in their own orbit of consequence. The humanitarian lawyer, perhaps, achieves a major victory in their distant field, yet the accompanying communication reveals a weariness that mirrors the protagonist's own. This mutual private recognition of shared sacrifice, even across gulfs of distance and time, offers a final, gentle closure. Not a reconciliation of paths, but a validation of the sincerity of their original commitment. The cold outside remains, but it is now perceived less as an external affliction and more as the necessary dignified setting for a love that transcended the convenience of proximity. The film ends not with a sudden warmth, but with the enduring image of a person standing firm in their own constructed reality, defined by an allegiance that time itself could not erode, a quiet testament to fidelity held in the deepest, most private chambers of the heart. The final resonance of the story settles on the protagonist's ability to forge a future, not despite the absence, but because of the unique self that absence has forged. The architect, having internalized the discipline required to sustain such a long vigil, begins to incorporate themes of transition and quiet space into their designs, buildings that acknowledge the inevitable departures and returns of human life, spaces that hold silence comfortably. Their professional maturity is now defined by an almost spiritual understanding of negative space, both in structure and in emotion. This is the ultimate triumph of their inspiration, channeling lifelong devotion into a tangible, useful form that honors the intensity of feeling without demanding its immediate reciprocation. The composer's final compositions, often performed in small, intimate venues rather than grand concert halls, are studies in patience. They employ long, drawn-out cadenzas where the performer is encouraged to hold the note until the very edge of physical endurance, mirroring the protagonist's own sustained commitment. These pieces suggest that true artistic depth comes from confronting limits, whether musical, physical, or emotional. Their career, viewed in retrospect, is a chronicle of endurance, each success a testament to surviving the emotional drought. The internal archive of memory, once guarded so fiercely against alteration, finally achieves a state of fluid grace. The protagonist can now recall the absent figure without the accompanying surge of physical pain or the immediate need to alter their present course. The memory becomes less an anchor, pulling backward, and more a deep root system stabilizing the self against unexpected storms. They have internalized the connection so thoroughly that the external manifestation of the person is no longer necessary for its reality. This is the quiet victory of perseverance, love enduring not as a hope for an external event, but as an established condition of one's own being. In the film's closing moments, the focus shifts entirely to the protagonist engaged in an ordinary, non-symbolic act, perhaps tending to a neglected garden, noticing the simple, unheroic resilience of a plant pushing through cold soil. There is no grand gesture, no phone call breaking the silence. Instead, there is a slow, almost imperceptible softening around the eyes, an acknowledgement that life continues to present textures, both harsh and gentle, and that they are finally equipped, through the crucible of waiting, to receive them without immediately filtering them through the lens of the lost relationship. The cold environment persists, but the protagonist has learned to generate their own internal warmth, a derived energy sourced from the profound, tested loyalty they maintained. The story concludes not with an ending, but with a sustainable continuation, a life lived richly within the context of a love that became a fundamental, defining grace. The narrative reaches a point of profound, almost geological stillness, where the continuous pressure of waiting has solidified into a bedrock of character. The protagonist, having navigated the complexities of professional excellence while emotionally suspended, now occupies their space with a distinct, quiet authority. The architect's final major work is often realized not in the gleaming towers of ambition, but perhaps in designing serene, almost monastic spaces for quiet reflection, libraries or observatories, structures that emphasize long perspective and the acceptance of vast distances. Their inspiration has pivoted from capturing the fleeting moment of connection to honoring the enduring structure of commitment itself, even in its solitude. This speaks volumes about the human capacity to repurpose deep emotional energy into constructive, lasting forms. This integration manifests in the way the protagonist interacts with the world's inevitable imperfections. Where once the dampness and chill of the setting were external antagonists, mirroring internal grief, they are now simply accepted as inherent elements of existence. There is a subtle resilience in the way they move, a physical manifestation of having weathered an internal emotional winter for years. The initial inspiration, perhaps rooted in a passionate, youthful belief in absolute romantic convergence, has matured into a more complex philosophical understanding. The true connection often involves acknowledging and sustaining the gaps. The memory of the absent figure has undergone its most significant transformation. It is no longer a series of vivid scenes demanding reconstruction, but rather a foundational mood, an emotional key signature that colors everything. If the absent person was the documentarian, whose life was dedicated to capturing external truths under duress, the protagonist realizes their own truth was internal, found in the steadfastness required to hold a vision against countervailing reality. Their past passion was a brilliant, unsustainable fire. Their present state is a slow, enduring ember, capable of generating its own light. The film implies that this long wait has gifted the protagonist an unparalleled patience, a quality that ironically benefits their career immensely. They are no longer hurried by external deadlines or the need for instant gratification. They can invest years into the slow refinement of a single concept, knowing that true mastery, like true devotion, cannot be rushed. The emotional residue of the separation has become a strange, powerful muse, compelling them toward depth over breadth, sincerity over spectacle. In the closing sequences, any residual tension evaporates, replaced by a profound sense of earned peace. The protagonist might be seen engaging in their craft with a serene focus, perhaps finally discarding the last physical token of the past, not in anger or defeat, but simply because it is no longer necessary for the memory to anchor itself externally. The rain may fall, the cold air may bite, but the interior landscape is settled. The waiting has ceased to be a sentence. It has become the quiet, dignified architecture of a life fully and consciously lived, a testament to a loyalty that redefined the meaning of present. The ultimate measure of this enduring state is seen in the protagonist's capacity for gentle, almost unconscious acts of grace toward the world around them. The architect, now perhaps mentoring younger practitioners, imparts wisdom not about structural integrity alone, but about the necessity of allowing for settling in any great work, the small adjustments a structure makes over time that ultimately define its endurance. Their advice carries the weight of lived experience in sustained emotional pressure, making them unusually empathetic to the hidden struggles of others. This newfound serenity also recalibrates their relationship with potential new connections, though these remain rare and carefully navigated. When a new person enters their orbit, there is no frantic attempt to imprint the ghost of the past onto them. Instead, there is an open, vulnerable honesty about the contours of their history. They share their past dedication not as an unresolved tragedy, but as a chapter that profoundly shaped their capacity for depth. This honesty paradoxically makes them more attractive to those seeking genuine, long-term partnership, as they project an aura of having already faced and processed the hardest emotional trials. The absent figure, when considered, is viewed with a detached, almost anthropological interest, the way one studies a potent historical event whose impact is still felt in the present landscape. The protagonist acknowledges that the separation, whatever its causes, served a function. It separated the ephemeral desires from the essential commitment. They realized that the initial dream was perhaps too fragile, too dependent on shared physical space. The current reality, while lonely, is forged from an ironclad conviction that has proven itself resilient to the chaos of the external world. The film's closing visual motif often centers on an object that symbolizes persistence without demanding presence. Perhaps the composer keeps a single, perfectly tuned tuning fork. It rings true and clear when struck, needing no accompaniment to validate its tone. This object represents the self-sufficiency achieved, the ability to produce resonance, beauty, and truth solely through internal mechanism. The rain may still fall, signifying that life remains unpredictable and often melancholic. But the protagonist is no longer standing out in the deluge, pleading for it to stop. They are inside, their carefully constructed life warm, ordered, and fundamentally complete, not because the void has been filled, but because the void has been understood as an intrinsic, necessary part of the room's architecture. The enduring love has metamorphosed from a frantic expectation into a quiet, unwavering ballast, allowing them to finally, fully, inhabit the present moment without reservation or regret for the path not taken, understanding that the path taken was the one that built the strongest self. The final, lingering impression is one of sanctified solitude, a state where the protagonist has achieved a form of emotional alchemy, transforming raw yearning into refined wisdom. The architect's buildings, these silent monuments to endurance, are now subtly imbued with a sense of peace. They are places where one can sit comfortably with difficult truths. The earlier tension, the constant surveillance of weather patterns and flight schedules, has dissolved not into forgetting, but into a deep, internal security. The protagonist understands that the potential for return was never the crucial element. The crucial element was the capacity to wait with such unwavering fidelity. The emotional landscape has stabilized into a permanent, low-grade hum of profound connection, unburdened by the need for immediate feedback. The composer's final concert, perhaps, features a piece written in complete silence, the musical notation merely indicating rhythmic breathing patterns, an abstract score representing the quiet, steady rhythm of their own existence. The audience might initially be confused, but those truly attuned to the work recognize the composition as the sound of absolute self-possession, the music generated when the ego stops striving for external reception. This is the ultimate artistic statement, finding the sublime in the unobserved and the unrequested. The memory of the absent figure is now honored through careful, deliberate distance. The protagonist no longer reads old letters. Instead, they might occasionally touch the binding of the book left behind, acknowledging its place in their history without needing to draw sustenance from its pages. This is the final act of respect, allowing the past to remain a historical artifact, pristine and unmolested by the messy demands of the present. They have recognized that their love was a vital, formative chapter, but not the final sentence of their story. Even in their rare interactions with the outside world, the protagonist carries an aura of quiet completion. They possess an unsettling calm, the kind that comes from having already survived one's deepest fear. The fear that one's devotion might be meaningless. This fear has been disproven by time itself. When they look at the sunset now, the involuntary urge to share it is replaced by a moment of internalized gratitude for the beauty itself, independent of a witness. The film's denouement avoids overt resolution. There is no sudden arrival on a doorstep, no phone call that changes everything. Instead, the protagonist is observed in a moment of simple self-care, perhaps brewing a cup of tea, no longer obsessively choosing the specific brand left by the other, but simply enjoying the warmth. The cold remains a feature of the external world, but it no longer dictates the internal temperature. The love persists, immutable, but its function has changed. It is no longer the engine of their suffering, but the quiet, deep foundation upon which a new, self-directed life is finally and securely built. They have not moved on, they have integrated, and in doing so, they have become whole. The conclusion settles into an almost spiritual depiction of autonomy, where the protagonist's existence is no longer a negotiation with absence, but a self-sustaining ecosystem. The architect finds a profound satisfaction in designing courtyards that catch the precise angle of the low winter sun, not for remembrance, but because they have finally learned to appreciate light on its own terms, independent of shared experience. Their touch on the blueprints is now one of confident stewardship, an acknowledgement that their vision is complete, regardless of who witnesses its final realization. The earlier obsession with meticulous alignment has softened into an appreciation for organic structure. They understand that imperfections are not flaws, but necessary stress points that allow a design to breathe. For the composer, this final integration manifests as an ability to collaborate again, though with a radically altered sensibility. They no longer seek partners who mirror their past passion, but rather those who respect the quietude they now cultivate. When engaging with musicians, their direction is minimal, focused on texture and breath, trusting the performer's own internal landscape to inform the delivery. Their greatest ambition has become the crafting of music that feels inevitable, notes that sound as if they could not have been placed anywhere else, much like the protagonist's own life, which feels entirely right in its current, hard-won configuration. The residual memory of the beloved is now akin to a well-worn, beloved language, that one speaks fluently in dreams, but rarely needs to articulate aloud in waking life. The protagonist has moved past the binary of presence versus absence. The relationship exists in a third, sovereign space, a recognized dimension of their internal geography. If they encounter reminders, a shared song on the radio, the scent of a specific perfume, the reaction is no longer an anxious jolt, but a momentary, gentle acknowledgement, like nodding to a familiar but distant landmark. There is a deep, almost unsettling freedom in this lack of dependence. This hard-earned peace is reflected in the physical environment. The small, carefully preserved shrines of memory, the open book, the uncovered chair, are either removed gently or repurposed. The empty chair might finally be used by the protagonists themselves, a quiet assertion of occupancy. The lingering cold in the apartment no longer feels like a sign of emotional neglect, but simply the ambient temperature of a space designed for contemplation. They have found a way to live with the space left behind, rather than perpetually in it. The final shot of the film often mirrors this quiet finality. It is not a dramatic farewell to grief, but a steady gaze forward. The protagonist might be seen looking out a window, perhaps years later, their features etched with time and experience, but fundamentally serene. They are not waiting anymore. They are simply being. The love remains a profound, shaping force, but it is no longer a narrative engine demanding resolution. It is the silent, deep resonance that allows the rest of life's smaller, beautiful, and sometimes difficult sounds to be heard clearly, finally, in their own right. The cinematic tapestry woven by Di Balik Hujan dan Dingin, Aku Tetap Menunggu, or Behind the Rain and Cold, I Still Wait, presents a deeply textured exploration of enduring love against a backdrop of societal pressures and personal sacrifice. This narrative, steeped in the melancholic beauty often associated with Indonesian cinema, dealing with complex interpersonal dynamics, hinges on the performances that anchor its emotional weight. The film's success largely relies on the chemistry forged between its lead actors, whose individual career trajectories inform the believability of their on-screen bond. Consider the male protagonist. Often, actors stepping into roles requiring quiet stoicism and deep internal suffering draw upon experiences in projects that demanded subtlety over overt melodrama. If this actor's previous work involved nuanced portrayals of struggling intellectuals or devoted partners facing long separations, perhaps inspired by the restrained emotionality found in classic literature adaptations, that history informs the palpable yearning etched onto his face during moments of separation. This is not a character shouting his pain, but one internalizing it, a choice that requires significant technical control. Conversely, the female lead's development is crucial. If her background includes roles showcasing resilience and adaptability, perhaps roles where she navigated difficult familial expectations or pursued ambitious, often solitary, creative endeavors, that strength translates into her capacity to wait. Her motivation isn't simply passive longing. It suggests an active decision to uphold a commitment, a choice perhaps fueled by shared foundational experiences that the audience only glimpses through flashbacks or shared glances. This subtly references the influence of actors who successfully transition from youthful ingenue roles to mature portrayals of women navigating patriarchal constraints with quiet dignity. The setting itself, the rain and the cold, functions far beyond mere weather. It acts as a constant, oppressive external force, mirroring the internal turmoil and the obstacles separating the lovers. The visual language employed, likely utilizing muted color palettes and deep shadows, echoes sensibilities reminiscent of certain early Southeast Asian New Wave directors who used environmental hostility to symbolize emotional distance or societal disapproval. The film seems to draw inspiration from stories where the environment itself is a character, actively testing the steadfastness of the central relationship. A significant thematic element is the concept of waiting. In many cultures, the act of waiting is spiritualized, transforming into an act of devotion. Here, the waiting is not passive resignation, but an active maintaining of hope, an internal commitment that requires immense psychological fortitude. The analysis must acknowledge that the narrative structure likely plays with time, stretching moments of brief reunion to feel both euphoric and agonizingly short, contrasted with long stretches where communication is minimal or fraught with misunderstanding. This manipulation of temporal perception is a common directorial device used to heighten the stakes of commitment. Furthermore, the film likely touches upon socio-economic disparities or familial obligations that act as the tangible barrier. If the separation is rooted in the need for one character to achieve a certain status or fulfill a duty before they can legitimately reunite, the love story becomes a commentary on the prioritization of societal roles versus individual happiness. This layering, love as a personal sanctuary besieged by external duty, gives the film its serious weight, moving it beyond simple romance into the realm of adult drama. The audience is asked not just to root for their reunion, but to understand the cost of their devotion to one another amidst conflicting loyalties. The enduring power of the film, therefore, lies in its refusal to offer easy resolutions, instead celebrating the quiet, stubborn persistence of affection even when the world seems determined to extinguish it. The emotional resonance of Di Balik Hujan dan Dingin, Aku Tetap Menunggu, is deeply embedded in the subtle language of unspoken communication between the leads. When the characters finally meet, perhaps under the sparse light of a secluded train station or a rain-streaked window, the dialogue is likely spare, weighted by all the accumulated silence of their separation. This restraint in verbal exchange forces the actors to convey volumes through the slightest shift in posture or the prolonged duration of a gaze. We see the history of their promises in the way their eyes meet, a flicker of recognition mingled with the faint scar tissue of past hurts or misunderstandings that absence inevitably creates. The male lead, perhaps portrayed by an actor known for his introspective roles, one who understands the gravity of a promise made years ago when circumstances were different, carries the burden of responsibility visibly. His movements might be characterized by a slow deliberation, suggesting that every action outside of maintaining his vigil for her is secondary, almost superfluous. If the actor's prior success stemmed from roles that required him to internalize the weight of a community or a family legacy, that sense of unwavering duty colors his current commitment to the relationship. He isn't just waiting for a lover. He is waiting to fulfill a vow that defines his very existence in the interim. The female protagonist, in her steadfastness, embodies a kind of quiet heroism. Her resilience is not aggressive. It is an inherent quality, cultivated through weathering personal storms, perhaps drawing on the spirit of characters who maintain domestic or artistic order in the face of chaos. When she reflects on her waiting, it is not with bitterness, but with a profound, almost philosophical acceptance that true connection requires tribulation. Her hands, perhaps often shown engaged in some repetitive grounding task, sewing, tending a small garden, or reading by lamplight, become symbols of her constancy. This contrasts sharply with the tumultuous, unstable environment represented by the constant rain and cold, symbolizing the world's attempts to wash away her resolve. The score, too, must mirror this emotional duality. It likely avoids sweeping, overtly romantic swells, favoring instead a minimalist approach, perhaps featuring the melancholic tones of a traditional string instrument or a solitary piano motif that surfaces only during moments of extreme vulnerability or memory. This underscores the idea that their love is a private, fragile ecosystem threatened by the vast, cold indifference outside. When the inevitable dramatic confrontation arrives, the moment where a third party, representing an easier path or a more practical future, attempts to sway one of the protagonists, the strength of the central relationship is tested not by grand gestures, but by the simple, resolute refusal to abandon the shared history. This refusal speaks volumes about the authenticity of their bond, suggesting that their connection transcends transactional needs or societal benchmarks of success. The film ultimately argues that the deepest fulfillment comes from honoring the commitments made when one was perhaps less capable, less established, and thus more purely themselves. The waiting, then, is not just an obstacle overcome. It is the forge in which their matured love is finally proven unbreakable. The psychological landscape of enduring separation in Di Balik Hujan dan Dingin, Aku Tetap Menunggu, is rendered vividly through the characters' coping mechanisms, which often manifest as rituals of memory. For the man, the act of remembrance might center around a singular, tangible object, a faded photograph, a pressed flower, or a letter whose contents he knows by heart but rereads anyway, searching for a renewed surge of conviction. This ritualistic engagement with the past prevents the present from completely eroding his future hope. His emotional landscape is one of carefully managed reservoirs. He cannot afford the luxury of despair, because to break down is to betray the commitment he made in the face of uncertainty. If the actor has previously excelled in portraying figures burdened by historical memory or obligation, perhaps characters from regional epics reflecting on ancestral duties, that sense of inherited commitment informs his current, intensely personal weight. The woman's coping mechanism often involves projecting the man's presence into her daily life, filling the void not with distractions, but with a continuation of their shared, idealized future. She might maintain a space in her home exactly as it was when he left, treating it as a sanctuary awaiting its rightful occupant. This isn't delusion. It's an active maintenance of possibility. Her interactions with the world outside this sanctuary might reflect a necessary guardedness, a subtle distance maintained even with well-meaning acquaintances, as if any emotional investment in the present might dilute the purity of her focus on the future reunion. This emotional selectivity suggests an actress whose previous performances have demonstrated the strength required to say no to societal expectations in favor of an internal, deeply held truth, much like celebrated figures in cinema who chose artistic integrity over mainstream compromise. The film beautifully contrasts their isolation with the bustling, indifferent world outside the pervasive cold and rain. We see glimpses of life moving forward rapidly for others: weddings, career advancements, the simple ease of companionship, which serve only to highlight the arrested state of the protagonist's relationship. These external scenes are shot with a sense of speed and superficial warmth, immediately contrasted when the focus returns to the leads, where the pace slows, the colors desaturate, and the sound design emphasizes the drumming rain or the lonely ticking of a clock. This juxtaposition effectively communicates that their love exists in a temporal pocket, suspended outside the normal flow of time dictated by external successes. The climactic emotional exchange, when it finally occurs, is unlikely to be about recriminations for the lost time, but rather an examination of the selves they have become during the wait. Have they grown apart in substance, even if their hearts remained tethered? This interrogation is the true test, far more daunting than any financial or social barrier. It requires a vulnerability that surpasses the simple act of showing up. It demands the admission of personal evolution, the fear that the person they waited for might no longer recognize the person they have become in their absence. This level of emotional scrutiny elevates the narrative. It suggests an indebtedness to the artistic legacies of filmmakers who favored psychological realism, where the greatest antagonist is often the gradual, insidious change within the self, rather than external villains. The final affirmation of their bond, therefore, is not merely a romantic victory, but a profound affirmation of shared identity, maintained across vast, challenging terrain. The enduring theme of sacrifice woven throughout the narrative gains deeper significance when examining the implied costs borne by the families surrounding the central couple. Often in stories emphasizing deep, unconventional commitment, the supporting characters represent the pragmatic voice of society or tradition, highlighting what the lovers give up by adhering to their promise. Perhaps the woman's family unit includes a figure, a parent or older sibling, who actively disapproves of the indefinite wait, viewing it as a squandering of potential marriage opportunities, or a refusal to accept reality. This family pressure acts as an additional layer of internal siege, forcing the waiting partner to defend not just the relationship itself, but their very right to choose their life trajectory. If the male protagonist's sacrifice involves long, arduous labor away from home, perhaps in an industry requiring physical remoteness or intellectual isolation, a research post, a long-haul maritime venture, or a high-stakes bureaucratic placement, his absence is framed less as abandonment and more as a grueling duty undertaken for the future they envision. The scenario draws upon archetypes of the noble laborer, whose physical hardship is silently exchanged for the emotional stability of his beloved. An actor drawing on a background portraying characters who endured systemic hardships, perhaps those representing the working-class struggles often depicted in realist drama, lends credibility to the sheer endurance required for such an ongoing commitment. The emotional complexity is further deepened by the potential for guilt. Guilt felt by the one waiting for imposing such a lengthy, uncertain demand, and guilt felt by the one enduring the separation for failing to hasten their return or for succeeding in ways that inadvertently create distance. This mutual acknowledgement of the burden carried by the other is perhaps the most profound expression of their love, eclipsing declarations of affection. It is shown in the careful wording of letters, where inquiries about personal well-being are couched in such a way as to never sound like an accusation or a complaint about the solitary existence. The visual motif of the cold and the rain, having served as external antagonists, must eventually yield, or at least be momentarily subdued, during moments of shared vulnerability. The shift might be subtle, a break in the downpour revealing a sliver of pale sun, or an indoor scene where the firelight manages to push back the shadows, symbolizing a temporary sanctuary won through sheer emotional perseverance. These visual respites are crucial. They serve as narrative proof that their fidelity is, in fact, sustainable, justifying the audience's investment in their arduous journey. The film suggests that true commitment is not the absence of difficulty, but the shared perseverance through it, a maturity achieved only when external pressures have stripped away all pretense, leaving only the bedrock of mutual devotion. The resolution, when it finally arrives in Di balik hujan dan dingin, aku tetap menunggu, must honor the painstaking realism established throughout, resisting any simplistic, fairy tale conclusion. The climax is less about a grand, dramatic embrace and more about the quiet integration of their separate, changed selves. The rain has likely stopped, or at least receded to a gentle mist, symbolizing the settling of external strife, but the emotional landscape remains scarred by the years of absence. The moment they look at each other after the final hurdle is cleared, perhaps a legal impediment removed or a career obligation fulfilled, the emotion conveyed is one of profound, almost exhausted recognition rather than ecstatic joy. The man, having potentially achieved the external success that necessitated his departure, may now find that this success feels hollow compared to the reality of his beloved standing before him, older, perhaps bearing the quiet marks of her own solitary battles. The actor's mastery here lies in portraying the sudden deflation of ambition now that the goal is reached. The focus shifts entirely from achieving to reconnecting. If his prior roles involved navigating arduous public scrutiny, this private moment of unguarded introspection becomes his most difficult performance, shedding the armor of competence required for his external role. For the woman, the reunion necessitates a delicate balancing act, celebrating the return while acknowledging the person she had to become in his absence. She is no longer the person he left, and he is not the man she idealized. There might be a shared, poignant awareness that while their hearts remained synchronized, their daily realities diverged significantly. This acknowledgement requires immense grace and unspoken forgiveness for the necessary self-preservation each employed. This character arc benefits from an actress capable of conveying profound maturity, suggesting she has moved past the need for external validation, finding her strength purely in the sustained internal commitment. The film's lingering commentary rests on the nature of shared history versus shared present. Their intense connection is built on memory and promise. The challenge ahead is building a life based on the tangible, imperfect reality of who they are now. The narrative subtly suggests that the waiting was merely the prologue. The true test of their love begins in the aftermath, in the mundane, uncinematic labor of rebuilding intimacy day by day, without the dramatic urgency of separation driving them. This mature perspective, focusing on the nuanced complexities of post-climax cohabitation rather than the thrill of reunion, firmly anchors the film in serious, adult emotional territory, leaving the audience with a sense of hope tempered by the hard-won knowledge that true love requires continuous, conscious effort even after the storm has passed. The cinematography, crucial in translating this sustained emotional tension, likely employs long takes during the pivotal silent moments, forcing the viewer into the character's protracted experience of time. These extended sequences, devoid of quick cuts or facile emotional cues, become visual meditations on patience. When the leads are finally alone after the separation, the framing probably emphasizes negative space, the distance between them within the frame, even when they are physically close, symbolizing the lingering psychological gaps they must bridge. This visual language echoes the deliberate pacing found in auteur cinema that prioritizes atmosphere over plot mechanics, valuing sustained mood over rapid narrative development. Consider the subtle artistry required for the actors to portray characters who have spent years primarily talking to ghosts or memories. When they finally speak candidly, their voices might carry a slight tremor, not from fear, but from the unfamiliarity of speaking their deepest truths aloud to the intended recipient after so long. For the male lead, the language he uses might be overly formal or slightly dated, reflecting that his primary source of emotional discourse was the correspondence from the past, highlighting how deeply their relationship was preserved in amber while the world, and they, continued to age. The environment, the rain and the cold, transcends mere backdrop to become the very texture of their shared memory. Every successful reunion scene might feature a recurring element, a specific scent, a piece of shared worn furniture, or the sound of a distant bell that acts as an anchor, instantaneously transporting both characters back to a specific shared emotional baseline, momentarily dissolving the years of separation. This use of sensory detail is vital for making the audience feel the sudden collapse of distance between them. If the film draws inspiration from narratives where one character sacrifices public recognition for private fidelity, the man's eventual success might be met with quiet rather than fanfare. Perhaps his achievements are recognized by institutions far away, leaving him physically present but emotionally distanced from the accolades. His greatest triumph, therefore, is simply showing up intact for her. This mirrors the dedication of actors who choose challenging, transformative roles in smaller productions, prioritizing artistic integrity over blockbuster recognition, thus mirroring their characters' choice of internal fulfillment over external reward. Ultimately, the film's profound impact lies in its refusal to romanticize the endurance itself. It shows that waiting is inherently painful, corrosive even, but that the love strong enough to survive it is necessarily transformed, hardened, refined, and perhaps slightly weary. The final image is likely not one of two perfectly aligned figures walking into a bright future, but two individuals standing together, side by side, gazing at the slightly clearing horizon, acknowledging the difficult journey already undertaken, and quietly preparing for the next phase of their shared, conscious commitment. The texture of time in this narrative, stretching and compressing moments according to emotional significance, necessitates a nuanced approach to showing the passage of the intervening years, not through montage, but through subtle shifts in costume and demeanor. The clothing worn by both characters must subtly betray the changing decades, the fabric perhaps becoming slightly less vibrant, the tailoring more pragmatic, reflecting the necessity of enduring necessity over youthful vanity. The woman's hairstyle might evolve from something romantically flowing to something neatly contained, indicative of a life managed with precision in the absence of a partner. These small sartorial choices, often overlooked in less rigorous filmmaking, become historical markers, grounding the abstract concept of waiting in tangible reality. The influence of the setting, the dampness, the persistent chill, also permeates the character's physical being. There is likely a visible stoicism in their bearing, a slight tension in the shoulders that suggests a chronic state of bracing against the elements, both meteorological and emotional. This internalization of environmental hardship speaks volumes, suggesting an actor's deep immersion in the physical reality of the role, perhaps drawing on techniques that emphasize embodiment over mere dialogue delivery, much like performers known for inhabiting physically demanding roles that require sustained, low-level discomfort. When they finally bridge the gap, the dialogue that surfaces must inevitably deal with the things left unsaid in their sparse correspondence. There will be confessions of near failures, moments where one almost succumbed to the pressures to move on, or moments where the burden of loneliness became almost unbearable. These admissions are critical. They transform the narrative from a simple testament to fidelity into an exploration of shared vulnerability. It is in these confessions that the audience witnesses the true strength, not the strength to wait perfectly, but the strength to return imperfectly and still be accepted. This mirrors the artistic courage required by actors who choose to portray flawed humanity rather than idealized perfection, embracing the messiness of sustained devotion. The film's power, therefore, lies in its emphasis on relational archaeology. They are not simply picking up where they left off. They are carefully excavating the foundations of their past selves and testing whether the current, matured versions can coexist upon them. The unspoken tension is whether the shared dream of reunion was more potent than the reality of their achieved individual lives. The quiet hope that saturates the final act is not the naive optimism of youth, but the tempered conviction of survivors who have navigated a long, dark tunnel and found each other, slightly bruised but fundamentally intact, on the other side. The lingering cold is gone, replaced by the gentle, careful warmth of necessary ongoing understanding. The film's commitment to realism extends deeply into the implied narratives of the supporting community, the echoes of which constantly test the protagonist's resolve. We must consider the community's perspective. Their well-meaning interference often presents the greatest temptation toward conventional happiness. Neighbors, perhaps, who observed the initial courtship and the subsequent departure, might now offer the woman practical, available partners, men who are present, stable, and require no waiting. These secondary characters, often portrayed with a slightly hurried, pragmatic energy by actors skilled at conveying societal expectation, function as externalized doubts made manifest. Their very normalcy highlights the extraordinary nature of the lover's commitment. The internal monologue of the waiting partner, often silent on screen, is implicitly rich with the language of comparison. When the woman observes a couple effortlessly managing the small logistics of daily life, a shared chore, an instant understanding in conversation, she is momentarily forced to weigh the abstract promise against the concrete, immediate comfort being denied. This is where the actress's ability to convey deep, complex feeling through minimal expression becomes paramount. The subtle tightening around the eyes, or a momentary slackening of the jaw, speaks of the daily, minute cost of maintaining hope against tangible evidence of easier alternatives. This echoes the nuanced portrayals seen in many classic European dramas, where private suffering is pitted against societal consensus. For the man enduring the separation, the threat is often the fear of becoming irrelevant to the life he is striving to return to. His success, if it involves intellectual or financial elevation, might mean he is speaking a different language upon return, not of vocabulary, but of experience. An actor portraying this must skillfully navigate the transition from a man defined by his struggle to a man burdened by his achievement, finding the common ground that was established in their shared youth. His letters, the only bridge, are likely fraught with this tension. He must report success without sounding boastful, and express longing without sounding weak or incapable of handling his external pressures. This internal negotiation reflects the dedication of artists who must constantly balance commercial viability with personal, uncompromising vision. The symbolic weight of the rain and cold often peaks during moments of near surrender. Perhaps a rare letter from the woman mentions a mild illness or a temporary lapse in her resolve, injecting a sharp, shocking moment of panic into the man's disciplined existence. This brief crisis shatters his composure, forcing him to realize the fragility of the structure he has built his waiting upon. These dramatic spikes serve to reaffirm the stakes, ensuring the audience understands that the endurance is not passive. It is an active, moment-to-moment victory over inertia and despair. The narrative thus argues that deep love isn't about defying external forces indefinitely, but about successfully managing the internal crises induced by those forces. The quiet perseverance itself becomes the central, defining action of their lives. The final unfolding of their reunion moves beyond simple happiness into the territory of profound shared exhaustion, a recognition that the victory is not in the ending of the wait, but in the enduring capacity to have waited together, albeit apart. The atmosphere surrounding their first extended, unhurried conversation is thick with the unspoken negotiations of two individuals who have become strangers by necessity. They are likely seated somewhere simple, perhaps in the quiet of a newly established shared space, a room not yet filled with shared memories, but ready to receive them. The emotional currency exchanged here is vulnerability stripped bare. The woman might confess that she almost forgot the exact sound of his specific laugh, a realization that strikes her with the force of betrayal, immediately followed by his genuine attempt to replicate it, the sound initially awkward, then slowly regaining its familiar resonance. This mirrors the technical challenge for an actor stepping back into a role after a long hiatus, needing to recapture a specific emotional timbre without resorting to caricature. The flaw in the replication, the slight hesitation, is what makes the moment real. The man's confession is likely centered on the terror of success. He might admit that achieving the objective that kept him away, the necessary wealth, the crucial position, felt empty precisely because the shared context for celebration was missing. His realization is that external validation is merely scaffolding. The true structure was always the relationship itself. This echoes the thematic struggles of artists who achieve mainstream success only to find their most meaningful work was born from the initial, less comfortable struggles, much like acclaimed directors who later find formulaic success unsatisfying compared to their early, passionate, independent efforts. The environment continues to play its symbolic role. If the rain has truly ceased, the resulting light entering the room is likely pale, diffused, the weak, new light of a difficult morning, not the blazing sun of a perfect resolution. This visual choice underscores the film's mature understanding. The trials have ended, but the scars remain, forming the new contours of their relationship. They are not two whole individuals reconnecting. They are two incomplete halves, now beginning the slow process of integration. The film ultimately leaves the audience with the understanding that the love story was never about overcoming the rain and the cold. It was about learning to carry that internal coldness, the accumulated loneliness, together, moving forward. Their commitment is demonstrated not by the grandness of their passion, but by the quiet willingness to learn the new habits of each other's matured selves. This enduring theme of conscious, continuous effort, favored by cinematographers who employ deeply thoughtful composition over flashy movement, cements the film as a profound statement on adult devotion, where waiting is merely the arduous prerequisite for the real, quiet work of loving. The legacy of Di Balik Hujan dan Dingin, Aku Tetap Menunggu, ultimately rests on its subtle critique of romantic heroism, suggesting that true strength lies not in the grand endurance, but in the messy, unglamorous process of re-entry. Once the couple is physically together, the film likely shifts focus away from the external world that separated them and toward the subtle territoriality of shared space. Who gets control of the routine? Whose habits have become too ingrained to easily yield? These mundane negotiations become the new, low-key battlegrounds. The camera lingers on small domestic moments, the way one automatically makes tea a certain way, the other's preference for quiet in the mornings, moments where the acquired solitude of years collides with the expectation of immediate intimacy. The male protagonist, having succeeded in his external quest, must now navigate the vulnerability of being seen completely, without the mitigating factor of distance. If his acting history involved commanding authority, here he must willingly relinquish it. We see this in moments where he seeks her approval not for a major life choice, but for a minor domestic matter, perhaps asking if a piece of furniture should be moved. This deference is his real sacrifice, showing that the status he gained was less important than the relationship he regained. His performance must convey that the armor forged in separation is now a hindrance to closeness, requiring a deliberate, visible softening of his features and posture. The female protagonist, having mastered the art of self-sufficiency, must now learn the difficult skill of allowing herself to be cared for, or perhaps of needing help again. Her independence, cultivated through years of necessary isolation, is a hard-won possession. A powerful scene might involve her breaking down, not from sadness over the past, but from the sheer exhaustion of having to maintain that strength for so long. This allows the actor to showcase a depth of layered emotion, the relief of safety mingling with the fear of vulnerability. This complex emotional presentation speaks to a commitment to portraying authentic womanhood, moving beyond the stereotype of the purely passive waiting figure. The film's nuanced handling of memory is also key in this final phase. They do not simply erase the past. The years of cold and rain become integrated into their identity. When they discuss the past, it is often with a detached, almost historical perspective, as if narrating the story of two other people. This distance allows them to analyze their actions without immediate pain, providing the necessary objective framework to accept their separate evolutions. The score, which likely became sparser during the separation, might now introduce a very quiet, warm, harmonic layer, suggesting that while the melody of their lives has changed, the underlying key remains the same. Ultimately, the enduring message of Di balik hujan dan dingin, aku tetap menunggu, is that true love is not a condition of ease, but a sustained, conscious act of translation, translating years of silent longing into shared dialogue, translating individual survival into mutual existence. The film suggests that the most romantic achievement is not the waiting itself, but the willingness to start over again and again in the quiet aftermath of the storm. The thematic weight carried by the concept of deferred gratification becomes the bedrock upon which the film's final act is constructed. This is not merely about waiting for a relationship milestone, but about the societal implications of putting life on hold. When the couple finally settles into their shared reality, the judgment, or at least the curiosity, of their surrounding community does not instantly vanish. There are lingering questions. What was gained in the time apart that justifies the lost years? The film implicitly challenges the modern obsession with constant forward momentum, suggesting that periods of necessary pause, though painful, can lead to a deeper, more authentic arrival. For the actors, this final phase demands a performance built on economy of movement and expression, reflecting lives that have learned to conserve energy. Having spent years reserving their emotional output for rare, intense exchanges, they must now learn the language of sustained, low-level connection. Consider the man's learning curve. He must replace the dramatic intensity of yearning with the quiet consistency of presence. If his career involved high-stakes decision-making, his greatest current challenge is the low-stakes, repetitive nature of true domestic partnership, the shared grocery list, the mundane compromise over television viewing. This shift requires an actor known for internal power to successfully portray the profound strength found in benign routine. Similarly, the woman's journey involves allowing her meticulously constructed self-sufficiency to gently dissolve in the face of shared life. Her former independence, born of necessity, could easily become a barrier to true intimacy. A critical moment might involve her consciously stepping back from a responsibility she has flawlessly managed alone for years, allowing her partner to take over, even if he does it differently. This surrender of control is a subtle, yet massive, emotional concession. It signifies that the relationship is now prioritized over the individual's perfected survival mechanism. This mirrors the journey of certain celebrated actresses who move from roles of fierce, singular agency to portrayals where their power is found in collaborative vulnerability. The recurring motif of the cold and the rain, having served as the initial overwhelming antagonist, resolves not into a sudden burst of tropical heat, but into a manageable climate. The air is simply neutral, neither hostile nor overly warm. This environmental resolution signals that their love has achieved equilibrium. It is no longer defined by crisis or opposition, but by the quiet, persistent work of maintenance. The film suggests that the most beautiful love story is not the one that survives the storm, but the one that learns to live comfortably in the steady, ordinary weather that follows. Their triumph is the successful negotiation of the quiet aftermath, proving that the foundation laid in the cold was strong enough to support the warmth of the present. The ultimate triumph of Di balik hujan dan dingin, aku tetap menunggu, is realized in the film's final, lingering moments, which eschew any definitive closure in favor of an open-ended commitment to the shared future. The narrative understands that a love forged in such profound separation is not healed overnight. Rather, it enters a new phase of cautious, deliberate construction. The lingering sense of time lost is acknowledged not with regret, but as an indelible part of their joint history, a shared mythology that only they truly comprehend. The physical intimacy, when it finally happens without the urgency of a brief, stolen encounter, is portrayed with a tender awkwardness that speaks volumes about their long absence. It is characterized by a necessary slowness, a mutual reverence for the body that has been yearned for, but physically distant for so long. This is not the passionate climax of romantic fiction, but the quiet, almost hesitant exploration of two souls who know each other's essence, but must reacquaint themselves with the present reality of touch. The actor playing the man conveys a deep, almost fearful gentleness, contrasting sharply with the perceived competence required by his external labors. The actress embodies a guarded openness, allowing her partner to see the subtle ways her body language has adapted to solitude, inviting him to learn her new contours. The film's most poignant final symbolic gesture revolves around light. Having spent so much time immersed in the gray, diffused light filtering through rain-streaked windows or the single yellow pool of a lamplight, their first shared dawn is rendered with immense care. The sunrise is not blindingly optimistic, but rather a soft, pearlescent gray, the color of hope mixed with hard-won realism. They watch it together, perhaps standing side by side at that same window, no longer looking out for salvation, but simply inward toward each other. This visual narrative suggests that the waiting was merely the purgatory. The reward is the shared, ordinary daylight. This maturity in storytelling elevates the film above simple romance. It suggests that the greatest act of love is the willingness to fully inhabit the present with someone, knowing that the past required immense sacrifice, but refusing to let that sacrifice become a defining constraint on the future. The final shot might linger on their hands, perhaps clasped, not in a tight grip of possession, but resting lightly, communicating the shared understanding that they are now present, fully available, and ready for the infinitely more complex work of simply living together. The audience leaves feeling not exhilarated, but deeply moved by the quiet, enduring dignity of two people who chose the arduous truth of connection over the ease of letting go. The narrative then turns its gaze to the enduring resonance of their physical tokens of remembrance, examining how these relics transition from vital anchors to poignant artifacts of a past era. The faded photograph the man kept, once scrutinized for every minute detail of her expression, now sits perhaps on a shared mantelpiece, its edges softened not just by handling, but by the very weight of memory it represents. Its significance shifts from a source of immediate conviction to a testament to a trial survived. The act of putting it away, or perhaps placing it deliberately where it can be seen without the desperate need to touch, becomes the final, silent ritual of acceptance. This signals the end of the necessary obsession with the past. For the woman, the curated space she maintained, the room kept pristine for his return, must undergo a transformation. The meticulous order, once a form of defiance against chaos, risks becoming a cage of expectation. Her subtle move might be to introduce a personal item of her own into that space, a new book, a piece of art acquired during his absence, a gentle assertion that she, too, has grown and claimed ownership of her present reality within their shared domain. This is a powerful, nonverbal negotiation of merged identities. An actress capable of such subtle environmental storytelling communicates volumes. The space is no longer awaiting a ghost. It is accommodating a complex, fully realized human being. The dialogue surrounding these objects is notably absent or incredibly brief. They don't need to recount the significance of the pressed flower or the precise context of a certain letter. The understanding is embedded in their shared experience. Any attempt to over-explain these artifacts would cheapen the profound, unspoken history they carry. This reliance on subtext forces the viewer to appreciate the depth of their nonverbal communication, a skill honed by years of reading between the lines of sparse correspondence. This echoes the work of filmmakers who trust the audience's intelligence, allowing silence and visual implication to carry the emotional narrative load. The lingering, subtle coldness that persists, even after the rain stops, is now understood as the residual chill of individual experience. It manifests not as anger or distance, but as a deep-seated caution, the learned behavior of self-preservation. They move around each other with a newfound, careful respect, recognizing that the slightest pressure might trigger the coping mechanisms developed during the separation. The film suggests that the most loving gesture in their new reality is the conscious decision not to push, to allow the other person space to decompress from the role of the waiter or the provider in exile. In its concluding movement, the narrative asserts that enduring love is less about dramatic fidelity and more about adaptive integration. The love story is not concluded with their reunion. It is merely rebooted onto a foundation of proven, tested character. The final feeling is one of earned quietude, a recognition that they have survived not just separation, but the far more insidious threat of evolving into incompatible versions of themselves. Their future is not guaranteed by past promises, but by the ongoing, conscious decision to choose each other, day by quiet day, acknowledging the deep, cold places they each visited alone, but refusing to let those shadows dictate their shared warmth. Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Complex Cinema channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you enjoy the content. Today, we are going to be discussing the film Di Balik Hujan dan Dingin, Aku Tetap Menunggu. The narrative unfolds, painting a picture of deep yearning and the subtle textures of memory clinging to the edges of present life. We are introduced to individuals whose paths are irrevocably altered by a central, perhaps agonizing separation. Consider the character whose life seems tethered to the echoes of a past romance, a constant hum beneath the surface of everyday activity. Their professional life, perhaps in a field requiring meticulous attention to detail, such as architecture, or perhaps even the exacting world of a seasoned musician honing their craft, becomes a mere backdrop to this persistent internal monologue of waiting. The setting itself seems saturated with the mood, a persistent chill, a dampness that mirrors the emotional climate of the protagonist. This sense of waiting isn't passive, it's an active state, fueled by memories that refuse to fade. We see glimpses into the shared history, moments that illuminate why this absence is so profound. Perhaps one character was striving for a breakthrough in their artistic endeavors, their dedication mirroring the intensity of their commitment to the relationship, only to have that ambition complicated by the demands of distance or misunderstanding. The story navigates the delicate balance between hope and the erosion caused by time. There is a palpable sense that the world continues to turn, careers progress, seasons change. But for the central figures, time is measured by the gap between meetings, the unread messages, the silent anticipation. Think of the visual language employed, long shots emphasizing isolation, close-ups capturing the subtle flickers of doubt and resolve crossing a face. This mirrors the internal landscape of someone deeply invested in a relationship existing primarily in the realm of recollection. The film excels at portraying how mundane settings become imbued with personal significance. A particular cafe, a rain-swept street corner, these locales are not merely scenery. They are monuments to shared moments. The internal struggle often centers on reconciling the idealized memory of the other person with the reality of their current, perhaps distant, existence. If one character, say, channeled their emotional turmoil into compelling creative work, perhaps writing a novel or composing a symphony that captured the essence of this longing, it speaks volumes about transforming pain into something tangible, yet never quite resolving the core issue. Ultimately, the recounting of this story is less about a dramatic climax and more about the sustained resonance of emotional commitment against the backdrop of life's relentless forward motion. It is an exploration of enduring affection, the quiet dignity of waiting for something or someone to return, and the beautiful, melancholic realization that even in absence, connection persists, woven into the very fabric of one's ongoing existence. The atmosphere settles like the cold moisture in the air, leaving the viewer with the lingering impression of profound, unwavering dedication. The atmosphere remains thick with unspoken history, the kind that settles heavily in rooms where silence has become a companion. We observe the protagonist, perhaps an architect whose blueprints now seem incomplete, haunted by the phantom structure of the life they planned with the absent person. This dedication to structure and precision in their professional life contrasts sharply with the chaotic, beautiful mess of their emotional reality. One can sense the influence of their formative years, perhaps a disciplined upbringing or an early encounter with sublime art, and that instilled in them this capacity for sustained, almost stoic devotion. The object of this prolonged anticipation, often glimpsed only through fragmented memories or perhaps carefully curated photographs, is painted as equally complex. Maybe this person embarked on a career requiring intense travel or immersion, such as documentary filmmaking, where capturing the raw truth of external realities often meant sacrificing the stability of personal ones. Their inspiration, we might infer, often stemmed from themes of impermanence and the search for genuine connection in transient spaces, a philosophy that ironically set them adrift from the stability they sought to build. The narrative frequently utilizes the sensory details of their shared past, the faint scent of a specific cologne, the texture of a worn sweater, the particular way the light fell across a shared table, to reanimate those memories with vivid immediacy. These recollections are not static. They are living entities that fight against the slow, numbing effect of time. When the character faces professional challenges, the temptation is always to measure their success or failure against the implied approval or disappointment of the absent lover, making career milestones feel hollow or incomplete. What makes the waiting so poignant is the internal debate. Is this steadfastness a virtue, a testament to true love? Or is it a form of self-imposed paralysis? The protagonist wrestles with the ghost of potential conversations, the arguments they never had, the apologies never exchanged. This yearning is not purely romantic, it is existential, demanding a resolution to a narrative thread that has been left dangling for far too long. The rain, that persistent visual motif, isn't just weather, it's the soundtrack to their solitude, cleansing the physical world while deepening the emotional fog. The film reveals that enduring this emotional winter requires a unique brand of inner resilience, a quiet, stubborn belief that somewhere, amidst the cold and the distance, the possibility of reunion still exists, waiting patiently for the seasons, and perhaps fate, to finally align. The emotional landscape continues to be dominated by this almost unbearable suspension, a state of being caught between a vividly remembered past and an uncertain future. We delve deeper into the protagonist's daily rituals, which are subtly molded around the potential for contact. Imagine the character, perhaps a dedicated researcher or scholar, whose focus is usually on verifiable facts and established histories, now obsessively tracking subtle changes in weather patterns or looking up flight schedules. Actions utterly divorced from their professional discipline, yet entirely dictated by their emotional core. This duality between the rational self and the yearning heart creates a constant, low-grade tension. The inspiration driving their past commitment is significant. Perhaps their initial attraction was rooted in a shared artistic vision or a mutual understanding of some obscure cultural reference, making the separation feel like a betrayal, not just of love, but of a fundamental worldview. When the protagonist encounters something beautiful or profoundly moving, a perfectly executed piece of classical music, or a particularly striking sunset over the city, the immediate, almost involuntary reaction is the desire to share it, a reflex immediately checked by the realization of the empty space beside them. This constant censoring of natural emotional expression drains a considerable amount of energy. The absent figure, when they finally appear in memory or through a fleeting communication, carries the weight of a life lived independently. Their actions are filtered through the protagonist's lens, often interpreted as evidence supporting the narrative of inevitable separation, even when they might be acts of unintentional neglect. If the absent one is depicted as a traveling photojournalist, their dedication to documenting suffering elsewhere might suggest an inability to fully commit to domestic happiness, framing their pursuit of external truth as the primary barrier. Their resilience, born from facing harsh realities in the field, ironically makes them less equipped to handle the quiet, sustained pressure of an intimate relationship maintained across vast distances. The film excels in detailing the small, almost pathetic concessions made to keep the connection alive in the mind. A specific brand of tea, a forgotten book left behind, these objects become talismans imbued with sacramental power. The protagonist might find themselves rereading old letters, not for new information, but to immerse themselves in the cadence and tone of the writer's voice, desperately trying to slow down the inevitable evolution of language and feeling that distance imposes. This waiting is an act of preservation, a fierce, almost painful attempt to freeze a moment in amber, fearing that if they allow time to fully progress, the memory will transform into something unrecognizable, or worse, something ordinary. The cold outside mirrors the necessary emotional insulation required to survive the duration of this vigil. The sustained emotional pressure warps perception, turning the mundane into a landscape fraught with symbolic meaning. Consider the protagonist now, perhaps a celebrated composer whose latest work is critically acclaimed, but feels hollow because the one person whose true artistic barometer mattered is absent. Their inspiration has clearly shifted from vibrant external observation to an intense, almost painful introspection, channeling the dissonance of hope and reality into